A very warm welcome, good evening, hello from Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Pick and Pay, and welcome to a triumphant, a beaming, a dancing in the streets, Dan, because gee, this is a terrific Monday. If, like me, you're a cricket fan, even if you're not, if you're just South African, you will know by now, I'm sure, that the South African women pulled off another great win at the World Cup this morning, that over the reigning world champions, England. So that got the day off to a flying start. Then my very, very dear friend Ron Rutland, the holder of the Guinness World Record for longest sustained midlife crisis ever, got going in Tokyo alongside his new riding partner Adam Nunn as Ron begins his third successive race to Rugby World Cup. They took off from Tokyo. They received the whistle. They'll be taking that match whistle to New Zealand. The Women's World Cup is later on this year in October. And then from there, they continue on across to South America, up north and across to get to Paris 2023, in the opening game of the World Cup in Paris next year, which is New Zealand versus France, the battle of two countries who wish they could make wine quite as well as South Africa does. Why do I mention those? Well, the first just celebrating South Africa. And I often make the point, if I'm speaking to events, that wine and sport are two of the great global triumphs for South Africa. They're two spaces where consistently we punch well above our collective weight. And then with Ron, well, I'll be joining him a few times on his adventures to look up some wine tasting in exotic places like I think Singapore in May and possibly Sydney later on this year, South America towards the end of the year, and America next year. So a couple of outside broadcasts, which I shall look forward to as I try wine from around the world and try and find South African wine in different corners of the world. But I'm also a happy and triumphant Dan, because I have not one, not two, but three world-class wine folk who've joined me from the middle of harvest, plus a gentleman who runs very cool and very exciting wine company. And to get winemakers during harvest means they're definitely trying to avoid all the hard work. And I've provided a handy excuse. And so in just a few minutes' time, ahead of the Ex Animo Indaba, 9th of April here in Johannesburg, which genuinely looks like one of the most awesome wine events of the year. And sadly, I'll be missing it. But I thought I'd celebrate it nonetheless. And so David Clarke from Ex Animo is one of my guests. We'll also be chatting to Anne Ferreira, to Trizanne Barnard, and to John Seccombe. They're all appearing at this. It's a rock star event. It's the Galacticos of wine coming together. This is Real Madrid of the early 2000s as wine folk, and they'll all be chatting to me very, very shortly. Before we do that, though, let's kick off the show, as we always do, and a quick look at some news from the world of wine. Ta-da! Here we go. This is happening next Thursday. The South African Sommeliers Association, Higo and his crew, the Wine Library at Culture Wine Bar, hosting a gala dinner and auction. It's 795 Rand a head. Matt Manning is your chef. The sommeliers will be your hosts, and they've got some really cool stuff up for grabs. They've got a big 6-litre bottle. There's Eric, good to see him. He'll be there. Eric Buerter, one of my favorite sommeliers. They will be auctioning a 6-litre bottle of Danelli. They've got some assorted vintages from around the winelands, a small but very carefully chosen selection. And all the money from that evening will go towards the Sommeliers Association. They do a great job in the education of the wine world and of supporting and helping young sommeliers in their journey into the wine world. If you're in Cape Town, I think they've only got 30 tickets. It is one to go to. I would highly encourage you go and join them. Looks like being a terrific, terrific evening. So sign up if you can. Elsewhere in the world of wine, the news of this week, and that is Marley McGregor. Who is Marley McGregor? She is the new winemaker at Cavalli. Craig Barnard has headed off to Eagle's Nest, so she has swooped in to take over. She was top of her class coming out of wine school, coming out of Stellenbosch, and is now taking over at Cavalli. They were in the news last for the wine magazine, their Cavalli Chenin Blanc filly, which got top honours. So some big shoes to fill, but it sounds like she has just the CV to be taking over. So all change at Cavalli, and by extension at Eagle's Nest. And how about this? I had dinner on Friday night at Marble, completely spoiled. So big thank you to Derek Kilpin from Great Domains and to Greg Sherwood from Hanford Wines, the South African master of wine. We had some 94 Stellenbosch, as the only South African on the list. It had held wonderfully for a wine that is approaching 30 years old. And it also held up for well enough against some fairly heavyweight competition, because elsewhere on the night, in no particular order, some Armand Rousseau from 2009 out of Chambertin, DRC or Romani Conti would be top. That's probably second. The Chateau Mouton Rothschild, that was just blindingly good out of 1990, still staggeringly fresh at 32, and probably a long journey to go. You can't quite see it there. Also a really nice Francis Bacon label. Some 2002 Dom Perignon out of the Kilpin cellar, because we get that also tasted nothing like as old as the label suggested it was. A terrific freshness. And then there was that was a bit up and down, the 2014. There was some debate between Derek and Greg as to whether or not that Château Montrachet was in fact corked. I stepped back and just smiled politely while the two of them arm wrestled it out. Let's just say it had plenty of character. I'll leave it there. And then how about this? For the end of the night, Derek pulled this one out, a Chateau Lafite Rothschild from 1968. But I don't ask Derek how he's found these things. The label just reaffirms the age. And also a wine, 68 to my knowledge wasn't the best of vintages in Bordeaux, but that one had still done particularly well, and it made for a superb night. Add in David Higgs's food, and you've got a cracker of an evening at Marble. Does that justify making the news? Well, Dan Really Likes Wine, it does, because I choose it. So there we go. That from the world of wine over the last few days. Right, as the rain gathers speed outside here in Johannesburg, let me move down to the Cape, where David Clarke is loosening up and getting ready for the 9th of April, which is a fabulous looking event with a whole range of top winemakers. 3 of them are with us. The great Anne Ferreira joins us, Trizanne Barnard joins us, and John Seccombe with a disappointingly meager beard. I'm a little sorry to see that. But welcome, guys. Lovely to have you all on the show, and an aristocratic gathering for a Monday evening. Dave, kick us off, if you will. Before we get into the Indaba itself, Ex Animo, a very cool name for the wine company. For people who don't know it, that haven't heard about it, tell us a little bit about what Ex Animo is and how it came into being.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, thanks for having us today. Really appreciate it. Ex Animo was born out of a bit of a frustration for my wife and I. As you can probably tell, I'm not South African. My wife is South African. We met in London in the Harrods wine department, if you believe that or not, back in the early 2000s. And I'll condense this a little bit. There's a bit of a long story, but yeah, it's worth a couple of seconds spending time on it. And so both wine professionals, been in the wine industry for a long time by that point. Fell madly in love. Of course I did. Of course she did. Moved to Australia. We turned into sommeliers, had some kids. Then we moved here in 2013. I'd come out for 2012 Cape Wine, the export expo in September, October, I think it was, of 2012, just to do a bit of a recce about what was happening in South African wine and work out what I was going to do. As being a sommelier in Melbourne, I came out and there wasn't really that many sommelier jobs, to be honest, and they weren't really paying what I was being paid in Melbourne, so it wasn't really a viable option. Came out to Cape Wine in 2012 and went through, spent from opening to closing at Cape Wine, which is a big event, tasting for 3 days straight, and found a lot of really amazing small South African producers producing world-class wines that I'd not seen either in Harrods, a lot of them, or certainly not in Australia, but even in Cape Town. When I came to visit Jeanette, I couldn't find these wines anywhere locally. So Ex Animo was created as a sort of a distributor for these wines that were focusing on export, because many of them back sort of 10 years ago now were solely export brands. So that 96, 90, 97% were export, because it was just a one-man band. So they didn't have the time or the skills or just the inclination to work the local market. And back 10 years ago, a lot of the local market, a lot of the outlets that exists now for sort of smaller high-end wines didn't exist then. So it was very reliant on supermarkets and big chain stores. Even the retailers like wine cellar weren't really focusing on local wines that much then. They were focusing much more on international things. So yeah, we started Ex Animo in 2014. It took me a little while to get my paperwork. Home affairs being what it is. So it took about a year to get all the paperwork and all that in order. And we started with Trezane, actually. Trezane was our first producer that we started working with. And we started in April 2014. And now we're lucky enough to work with 24 top-end producers around the Cape. So, yeah, but we distribute nationwide. And Ex Animo, sorry, and Ex Animo. I'll actually try and answer the question you asked as well. Ex Animo is a Latin term which means sincerely or from the heart, and so the reason why we named Ex Animo that is because we think that makes a massive difference when producing wine, that you actually believe in what you're doing and you're not just making a wine for market. You're not just working with the numbers, but you've got passion and you're driving to achieve something that's in your heart, and you're getting there. So that's the idea about Ex Animo.
It's not often, David, that we welcome Australians into South Africa, but we'll make a very happy exception for you because you made a terrific contribution in a relatively short space of time. And you mentioned you've got some superstar producers. You really do. And it's a lovely collection of wine people who you do work with. And that makes the event that you are bringing to Johannesburg on the 9th of April a natural extension of that family you have created, because you've brought together some seriously cool people for this event. It's an event that takes us through a variety of wines over the course of the day. Sketch out for people watching what is going to be happening at this Indaba.
Yeah, thank you. The Indaba the idea for the Indaba was first sort of thought about as far back as 2016, 2017, when we started being pulled up to Johannesburg by restaurants and retailers wanting the wines that we were selling. And they were just saying, well, there's never any great wine events up in Johannesburg. They're always in the Cape or in the winelands. So we promised them that there would be eventually a really big, fun and informative wine event in Johannesburg. And this is it. So the Indaba is centered around 3 seminars, more masterclasses throughout the day. It's an all-day event, so it starts from 9 a.m. in the morning and then goes through till after dinner, so about 10 p.m. or whenever you want to stop drinking. And it's in Rosebank in Johannesburg. So if you know the Proud Mary restaurant, it's above that. It's in a shared working space called Workshop 17, the Bank. They've got a lovely open sort of terrarium type of space there. So we're going to empty that out and put lots of benches and seats and glassware in and mics and screens. So yeah, it's got three seminars. So the first seminar is going to concentrate on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So we're calling that Double Trouble with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And that's going to be moderated by Pieter Ferreira, who's the chairman of the Cap Classique Producers Association, who also happens to be married to one of your other guests tonight. The second seminar is moderated by Christian Eads of winemag.coza, and that's called Chenin Unchained. A little bit of Tarantino, stolen a bit of Tarantino's fire there. So concentrating obviously on South Africa's main grape, which is Chenin, which is obviously setting the world on fire, and just trying to get their heads around what's happening with modern Chenin Blanc in South Africa. And then the last seminar is Never Say No to Syrah. So based on Syrah, or as our friend Niels Verburg says, Shiraz. And I've learned to say Syrah now, but I used to say Shiraz for a long time. And Shiraz, by many people's estimation, Christian Eads being one, Tim Atkin, MW being another, is the most exciting red grape variety in South Africa at the moment. So we're going to have a look at 7 top-end produce examples of Syrah in that panel, and that's moderated by Colleen Morris of Wine Menu. I think many of your viewers will know Colleen, who's based in Kramerville at Wine Menu and does an amazing job up there.
It is a scintillating selection. It kicks off with that double trouble. Let's go over to a member of a panel that also includes, I think Genevieve Nelson's there, Stompy Mayer's taking part, Donovan Rao, Jane Needs is there as well. So it's a great collection. And Ferreira, double trouble, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I think you'd probably be both A, excited, and B, extremely good at covering any grapes. But these two do sit rather comfortably in the Ferreira household, don't they?
That they do. The perfect match. So extremely excited. It's going to be a fabulous theme, I think, particularly with Chardonnay being so versatile, as well as Pinot Noir being so versatile and interesting. I mean, challenging in many respects, but great Cap Classiques, great single varietals, looking at Restless River, for instance, great Pinot Noirs coming out. So it's going to be brilliant.
The natural assumption with Pieter running the panel and with you involved in it is that there'll be a strong leaning towards turning these particular grapes into effervescent versions thereof. Is that the focus, or is there a strong still wine component as well?
No, there's a strong still wine component as well. Part of the Ex Animo portfolio has got some serious rock stars, as I mentioned, talking about Craig and Anne from Restless River, for instance. So it's going to be a good mix. But then we've got Dainty Bess, who's producing a brilliant Pinot Noir-based Cap Classique. We've got Genevieve with her Blanc de Blanc. She also makes some other Cap Classique, which doesn't fall under Pinot Noir, but also interesting. Maybe she could be part of the third panel as well. So a good mix, but yeah, heavy emphasis on great South African Cap Classique.
You're going to be sitting on this panel. You're going to get grilled fearsomely by your husband, I have no doubt. What are you looking to get out of this as a panelist? What are you looking to project in terms of your perspective 2022 and Ferreira on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in South Africa?
So I think, I mean, to make it quite clear, I own my husband, so I'll be doing the grilling. He won't. As I own the brand. No, so excited. I mean, I think it's hugely important for us both and the other two producers in the Ex Animo stable to spread the word about how phenomenal Cap Classique is and what a great alternative it is to other sparkling wines, champagne from the world, if not better. And I mean, 2022 has been an interesting harvest, challenging. Started later. We finished about 3 weeks ago. But we're both, Pieter and I, are quite purist when it comes to Cap Classique. We like using the classic Chardonnay grapes, Pinot Noir. I think it shows in the style of wines we make. We make a beautiful, our Blanc de Blanc is so elegant. We give it a long time on the lees, more than most other wineries, 6 years in South Africa, minimum of. Our rosé as well, with time on the cork, it's 100% Pinot Noir. And then just to add to the mix, we've also got a new Extra Brut, which is a Pinot Noir Chardonnay blend. So we make it quite simple. Huh? If it's Pinot Noir, if it's Chardonnay, then we're good at it.
I see Pieter Ferreira is watching at the moment. Hi, Dan, he says, while doing the ironing next door and sending through a quick message of good wishes, Pieter. We're looking forward to finding out how it all goes. You're going to be a terrific host for that first panel, which is put together, as is the whole day, by Ex Animo. Trizanne, it was mentioned just a moment ago that you were one of the very first people to join in with the Ex Animo adventure, as it was. What was it about this slightly optimistic Australian who thought he could start a wine business in South Africa that convinced you to hitch a ride along with him?
I think it was his wife, Jeanette, rather. No, as Dave mentioned, back in that day when I started, which was in 2009 on my own, it was quite hard being a independent winemaker, small producer, to get your wines out there. Like David said, being a one-man band show back then, making the wines and then also marketing it and selling it, it was quite tough. It was a tall order, especially for someone who studied more winemaking and definitely not marketing or sales. So I was just too happy to jump on that bandwagon and go for the ride along with David and Jeanette and see how we could, work this market and get the market, get them open up for the smaller producers, the independent winemakers, coming not from an estate, not the traditional way and not the traditional wines, buying in grapes. It was a whole new story that we had to get out there in the market that was very kind of accustomed to a certain style of wine and also how wines were produced back then, being estate driven. So I was very happy to have someone holding my hand and journeying this it was a very kind of uncharted territory back then.
Well, it's clearly been a very rewarding partnership for both sides. We're going to come back to you to find out a bit more about your segment slightly later on, but very quickly, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. There is the option for questions from the audience. What would you be firing off at Anne, demanding to know about the world of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from the perspective of another producer at the moment, Trizanne?
Sorry, Dan, just can you just repeat the question?
Just wondering, there is a Q&A session after each of the three segments. What would you most like to ask Anne as a Pinot Noir Chardonnay specialist when you're barracking her from the front row of the audience?
I've entered the realm of Chardonnay just recently, and I think my question would be in terms of styles. So I make a Chardonnay that doesn't go through malolactic fermentation, and just in terms of style-wise, what is out there, the audience or the consumer, what is the preference? They've been in the Chardonnay realm for so long, and they've obviously made different, stylistically very different. But mallow is one of the things as a winemaker, preserving acid. For me, what does the consumer like out there? Are they so accustomed to mallow? Is putting a wine out there, Chardonnay specifically without mallow, is it accepted? I guess that would be my question.
All right, and you can wait till the 9th of April to give us that answer. Gives you some time to prepare it. John, just before we jump on to segment 2 of the Indaba, the important question for this time of year, how's the harvesting world going?
Yeah, Dan, we're just luckily coming out of the woods this week. The previous 2 weeks have been very, very rough indeed. I work in a communal space, so I think when everybody's grapes are coming in, there's definitely some frayed nerves, and I think by the end of it, everyone's a bit tired of each other. But we had a good weekend in Pringle Bay to kind of clear there and drink some decent wines and get to love each other again. So yeah, we're getting out of the woods this week. Probably got another 10 tons to go out of 80. So yeah, we're on the home straight.
You're going to be focusing on, I think you're involved in segment 2, which is Chenin, which we'll talk about momentarily. I know you've got the Copper Pot Pinot Noir, but here you've got this first segment, Pieter Ferreira running it, and Ferreira part of it, some giants and titans of the world of bubble creation. Could this be the nudge that you need, John Seccombe, to finally make that Thorne Daughters Cup Classique?
Yeah, well, there is something bubbling away in the cellar. That's Peter Allen Finlayson and myself, Peter Allen of Crystallum fame and myself have got a little bit of a shared project. We're obviously living in Pinot Noir and Chardonnay country down near the Himalaya Valley here. So yeah, we've got a little project together to put out some Cap Classique, but it's going to be tiny and nothing to threaten the Ferreira giants there, whose wines we love. And I think my time when I was part of the MCC Association, it was always a privilege to listen to Peter's talk, and he has a real wealth of knowledge. Sorry, someone leaning over my shoulder in my communal office here. And he's got a real wealth of knowledge there, which was always wonderful to share. yeah, but in answer to your question, I dabble around quite a lot with Chardonnay and Pinot. I think like Trizan, I haven't resisted the siren song. I do love white and red Burgundy, so I think I never resisted making a little bit myself.
Pieter Ferreira saying it will be a great expression of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, showing the versatility. That's the segment as a whole. And that is the first one that kicks things off. The second one is Chenin. Let's head back to David. David, just set the scene for us. It is a grape that is doing wonders for South Africa, but it's also one where I almost get the sense that we're now having to live up to that expectation a little, because the rest of the world has realized just how well we do it. How are you framing this particular segment? What do you feel the sense from our guests, from our panelists, is going to be on Chenin in 2022 in South Africa?
Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's probably the most exciting category that I came across when I first got here was Chenin and what was happening with Chenin. Obviously, historically, it wasn't taken very seriously. I mean, there was obviously a lot of vines in the ground, but all of the classic South African wines from yesteryear, from the decades gone, mostly all red. And you always had all this Chenin in the ground, but obviously not many people were taking it seriously. So it's really interesting the last sort of 20 or so years that Chenin's become such a powerhouse and really bossed column inches, points as well, in terms of South African production. What we have on the day is many different expressions from top winemakers, ranging in styles from full skin contact, a little bit of carbonic maceration Chenin from Stompie Meyer up in Motherrock, up in the Swartland. You've got really electric early pick stuff from Craig Hawkins from his Cortez vineyard, which was the second wine he ever made. We've got the Serra Raal, which is a cool climate Chenin out of Elgin by the, how should I put it, enigmatic Kunarusa from Spionkop. But we can't forget Chenin blends either. So we've got the Rocking Horse from John Seccombe, obviously, from Thorne Daughters, which is just a world beater. I mean, I remember releasing John's 2013 wines to the market in 2014, and people were sort of very curious about this guy with this sort of diagonal diamond label, with a white blend and a skin contact Semillon Gris back in 2014. So it wasn't the easiest sell. It was our second month into the new business, but no, the wines. I mean, I had a 2013 Rocking Horse relatively recently, a couple of months ago, and it's still singing. I mean, I don't think it's going to live, for another 50 years, but it's a really solid wine, and Chenin Blanc in general is really leading the way in South African white wines. I also export a little bit of wine to Australia, and Chenin is easily the most asked about variety that we send there. So no, there's some great wines on offer at the seminar in the second seminar. And
well, let's head over to the man responsible for a couple of those wines just mentioned. John, there is the hint as mentioned of Chenin and the Rocking Horse. I think current vintage is about 15%. There's also the old vine in the cat's cradle. Where does Chenin Blanc sit for you as the passion project you have with wine?
Well, Dan, I think you'll see from the range of wines that I produce that I'm very, very curious, and I have a difficult time saying no. So I've got quite a spread of varietals. But I think just anecdotally, in the years that our Chenins are really on fire, that obviously brings a lot to the Rocking Horse, which is our flagship wine. And I think, like Dave's saying, Chenin, I think the stat is we've got about 70% of the world's plantings of Chenin, so we're definitely one of the most important producers of Chenin in the world, if you just take it from a volume perspective. But I think what's happened in the last 15, 20 years is we've seen this incredible rise in quality. We've seen this incredible diversity of styles coming out, and we're really seeing, the terroirs of Chenin being expressed. And I think that's what's so exciting about the grape. It's got an incredible ability to express the place that it's from. It likes to show the fingerprints of the winemakers that work with it, and I think that's a lovely balance, when you've got something that, I know as winemakers, we're supposed to do nothing in the cellar, but, it's an awful lot of hard work. So it's quite nice to see some effect of your work on the wine, through that, and not just the place that it comes from. So I think, Chenin's got a lovely ability to express both. And from my side, it still forms about 15% of my harvest. So, it's a very important part of what we do. And, I think for South Africa, it's been very gratifying. I think, growing up with Ex Animo, like our business did, we've also grown up alongside other great winemakers, like someone like Chris Arlight, who's a great friend, and to see these absolute world-class expressions of this grape in this country, that are really doing justice to the vineyards that we have and the winemaking talent that we have.
Which is reflected in the wines that will be shown, not just by yourself, but by everybody else. Wines, though, that although they come from Chenin Blanc, will all have, either as blends or on their own, their idiosyncrasies and their points of difference. David mentioning Kuhn a moment ago, calling him, I think he said, eccentric or eclectic. I think wonderfully mad is probably the best way I'd put forward the Belgian, who makes such a cool selection of wine. You're doing it in particular with Chenin, with a grape that has had this extraordinary evolution from very much a blue-collar worker of the wine world into something quite aristocratic in the right hands. Where do we sit, do you feel, with our interpretation of Chenin Blanc in South Africa? Are we gravitating towards a collective style? Is it very much where it comes from and who makes it? How are we doing in terms of where we sit today?
Well, Dan, I think our best examples will certainly fare very well in the ring with the best examples from anywhere else in the world. I think there's some great wines coming out of California. Obviously, the spiritual home of Chenin is the Loire, and I think certainly in the best years from the best producers there, you're going to get some absolute world-beating wines. But, I would very happily, bring any of Donovan Raw's single vineyards. David Sadi, his single vineyard wines are, absolutely ethereal and electric. So I think the best of our Chenin Blanc wines will, stand happily alongside any other great examples in the world. And, I think going back to it, I think it is a combination of vine age, great terroirs. I think a lot of luck in having old vines in wonderful soils in the right areas, and then the winemaking knowledge and experience that's come in the last sort of 20 to 30 years. It's sort of that we're all really standing on the shoulders of giants and and building on what was gone before. And I think what's like a lot of other grape varieties, we're starting to see a real South African identity for the grape, which I think is the most important thing. I think maybe if you went 25 years back, a lot of producers would be aiming to produce a Loire style. I think it's much more important than that. We now have, very clear examples of Chenin from the Paardeberg, on granite, that shows, that terroir very clearly. So, I think we can sort of stop apologizing for the fact that we're not like the Loire, celebrate the fact that, we're more like the Swartland, and we're producing great wines from these places, and I think Chenin's been an incredibly important driver in that, because I think a lot of young winemakers had access to these incredible vineyards at good prices, at sort of rock bottom prices when we were starting out, and we've been able to build a wine business on them.
you'll be able to hear even more of that discussion. It's a great discussion from not just John, but people like Jocelyn Hogan-Wilson will be there, or the Cravens will be speaking on this particular panel, Donovan Rowell, a wonderful conversation. A conversation that won't, though, include Trizanne, who steadfastly does not make Chenin Blanc. I was having a flick through earlier. There's loads of Semillon, loads of Sauvignon Blanc. Trizanne, there's the Chardonnay you can't produce the name of until you've actually finished the entire bottle on your own. No Chenin at the moment. Is that on the horizon? And what's the philosophy for you on South African Chenin Blanc?
Dan, no, there's no Chenin on the horizon for me. I think there are incredible producers out there, and they are so focused on Chenin, on the vineyards, that I'm just going to leave it to them. I'm going to keep on focusing on the Sauvignon, on the Syrah, a bit of the Chard, but so proud to be part of South Africa, and the Chenins that we put out there. Like John and everybody mentioned, that it is becoming a flagship for South Africa. So, I love drinking Chenin, but I'm not going to produce one anytime shortly.
The anti-Peter Walser approach, which is both refreshing and admirable, and you certainly don't need to, because the wine that you are producing is sensational in its own space, and it's wine that I think has a not dissimilar story to Chenin. That we're creating the Chenin on our own terms, but we're doing that with so much of our wine. We'll talk about Syrah shortly, but your whites, the Semillons you make, the blends that you make. Again, it's like a lot of our top winemakers. It's wine made on your own terms, wine made you reflecting, I feel, South Africa, reflecting who you are and what your terroir is, as opposed to trying to mimic somebody else and create something that you're not naturally are.
Yeah, no, I think we tend to choose something, and we go into a direction. Either you're nudged into that direction, or you deliberately chose that. And I think the more you get engrossed in it, and it kind of becomes your way. So that's where I am with Sauvignon and Semillon. I think for me, it's probably my area, the Elam area. I just love that area. I love going back there every time. And that's where, it produces certain grapes which I work with, and Chenin is not one of them. But yeah, I think, I think a lot of us are focused on area, and really trying to get under the skin of what an area can give us. And to really understand those vineyards, you need to spend time in that area. And I think that's exactly where I am with Elam at the moment, and also just in the cooler climate area. I've been in that area since 2009. So, just getting a more feel of where we are with the weather patterns, the soils, how that wines are doing in bottle, how they're aging, and also like just tweaking your wine styles.
Well, we'll talk about the magnificent Syrah you produce in just a second. Before we go into our last stretch, let's just jump back to the CEO and global head of Ferreira Wines International, and the Chenin story. I know both you and Peter are flooded with questions all of the time about Cap Classique, and you very proudly answer them as the backbone of that particular space. But as John was saying, the Chenin story, so proud for South Africa, and it's not just Chenin Blanc that Chenin Blanc has helped, but all of South African wine has really benefited from the growth, strength, and quality beyond South African borders of how Chenin Blanc shows.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have a very partial to Chenin Blanc, and in fact, there are a few South African producers making a Chenin Blanc Cap Classique. Ken Forrester being one, Krista from House of Chevalier is making. There are a few people. I think it's a great ambassador for South African wines as such. And as John was saying, I mean, the fact that we are making Chenins unique to us, yet stylistically quite diverse, but proudly South African, is phenomenal.
I don't know if you can really include Ken Forrester as somebody who's specifically doing that. Ken Forrester tries to make Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon out of Chenin Blanc. So he's a little bit militant in his love thereof. But you're right, there are some lovely bubbles coming out of Chenin. And so Chenin Blanc, I think, is going to be a fascinating space. But as was said right at the start by David, as a red grape, Syrah is as exciting as anything we have in South Africa. Our final panel, Mr. Clarke, take us through what to expect before everybody tumbles into an evening of revelry and drinking wine out the bottle.
Yeah, I hope everyone's at least having a glass already. I'd be upset if they're not. Syrah is, it is. Look, I think it's the most exciting wine coming out of South Africa, Chenin included, to be honest. I think some of the examples of South African Syrah are truly, truly world class, and with no caveats about it's the second home of anything. It's just they're just world class, full stop. So on the panel we have Chris Williams. He's showing his Foundry Syrah, the new or yet to be released 2020, and he's aged that in terracotta, which he imported from Spain. Obviously, long-time cellar master at Mearlist, so he's concentrating on his own brand full-time finally after 21 years, I think. 2001 was the first harvest, so that's what 22 harvests now. We've got a couple of only one Swartland Syrah from Jürgen Hers from Interlagos with his 2019. I've got a wine from Paul from Justenberg Estate, so organic, the Clipper Co. We've got Luddite, of course. Niels and Penny have been producing world-class Shiraz out of Botrivier for, again, 20-odd years. We've got the new 2018, which is already allocated and sold out. So it's going to be pretty much the only way you're going to taste it. And then a couple of wines from Stellenbosch, and Stellenbosch is becoming, well, if not, was already very serious for Syrah, but is becoming more and more important as each vintage goes on. We've got the Swanesang from Bernard Bredel out of vineyards below the Helderberg that his grandfather planted, and Lucas van Locherenberg. I think you had him on last week from memory. His Graft, which comes off the Caribib vineyard. That's at 2020, so he's going to serve that in large formats. And then last but not least, we have the young lady who you've spoken to a few times already, Trezan's Reserve Syrah from Elam. So a real plethora of different terroirs and styles of Syrah shown on the day.
We certainly did have Lucas van Locherenberg, currently sporting a quite magnificent moustache on the show just last week. We also not that long ago had the team from Woza in the UK running through some thoughts. And one of the thoughts that came out there, and it's come out from a few people, is exactly that echoes what you've just said, David, and that is that Syrah, as not just a red, as a wine as a whole, is so exciting for South Africa. Trezan, you're no small reason for that. From your perspective as a winemaker, what is it about Syrah in South Africa at the moment that makes it quite so exciting?
Thanks, Dan. I think without repeating what we've been saying, it is the diversity of the grape in terms of where it grows and also stylistically how we can make it. So I just, it's an exciting time to make Shiraz or Syrah because I think the grape lends itself to many different styles and many different areas. And therefore, like David said, you can find a Syrah that will kind of almost suit any palate, from your heavy-bodied wines to your lighter styles, made highly extracted or no extraction at all, So it is just I think where in the past it was quite one-dimensional in terms of how we made Syrah. Now, people are definitely more exploring different ways, and the grape actually lends itself to it, which makes it a very exciting grape to work with.
in terms of the wine that you're making at the moment versus when you started out, how Syrah evolved in South Africa for you? And then more broadly speaking, how have you seen the grape evolve, let's say over the last decade or so, when it started, I feel, making a lot more headlines and raising a lot more eyebrows around the wine world?
Yeah, you know, Dan, so I started making Shiraz actually in 2005 at Andolka, you know, and the focus back then was very much high alcohols, highly extracted wines, you know, super ripe. And interestingly, how I've, you know, how things have changed for me is kind of exactly how the wine, the world of Shiraz has changed, I think. We're kind of moving away from those heavy wines, those highly extracted wines, and more into slightly lighter styles, or understanding the grape a little bit better, or respecting the grape a little bit better. And I had first-hand experience with that when I hit Elim in 2009. Was the first Elim Syrah that I made. I never released it commercially. But I was very heavy-handed with the wine, and I almost overcompensated for the fact that I was in a cool climate area. So I really waited for super ripeness, and I really extracted it and added a lot of oak to the wine. And then in 2013, things have changed for me, and I actually went into the vineyard for the first time blindly and picked blindly. So I didn't take any analysis. I just went on what I tasted, and I brought the wines back into the cellar. Sorry, this is 2017. I brought the wines back and the grapes back, and I made a wine that was literally almost 2% lighter in alcohol. And I completely changed the style of my winemaking. And I mean, I did that blindly. I didn't go out to do that deliberately. But I think it was the best thing I could have done because for the first time, I was expressing the cool climate Shiraz. And I wasn't trying to make a wine that was kind of the focus of Shiraz at that stage, you know, big Shirazes. I was actually for the first time expressing the area. And I think there's been a big move away from creating wines that we think we should make and creating wines that the area is actually wanting us to make. So, and I think across the South African range of Syrahs, I've seen a move towards Syrahs more expressive of the area, and therefore not always huge in alcohol. I find when a wine goes in a very high alcohol, it almost loses the identity of its area. And when you can bring back that alcohol a little bit, you get a bigger expression of the variety and the area. So yeah, there's been a big evolution for Syrah, and personally for me, from going from really high, big alcohol wines to much lower alcohol wines, much more elegant and lighter style. And I think there's been a movement across South Africa to explore the elegant styles of the Shiraz grape.
And that is reflected in the Trazan signature Syrah amongst the range of wines she has. That'll be the focus in segment 3. John, there's a touch of Syrah, more than a touch. I think there's about a third in your Wanderer's Heart. Where does Syrah fit into the second wine philosophy in South Africa?
Yeah, Dan, I think I've been slowly drawn into it as well. I think, you know, when I started off with the Wanderer's Heart, I wanted more of a focus on Grenache, you know, which produces lovely, light, bright, perfumed wines. But I think, you know, the message I was getting back from the market was, you know, looking for a little bit more grunt and fruit weight, which we found in Syrah. And, you know, over the years, I've sort of refined my vineyard selection there. Getting some wonderful Syrah grapes now from the Breda Kloof, from a friend there. And yeah, I definitely think it's lent some fruit weight and gravitas to the wine, which, you know, I'm really appreciating. I think my original vision for that wine was something lighter and brighter and crunchier. But I think, you know, having that bit of dark fruit density from the Syrah, has definitely made it more of a crowd pleaser. And, and I think that's one of the wonderful things that Syrah can bring. It can really give you that density of fruit. And I think, like Trizan's saying, without sacrificing alcohol weight and sweetness and all that sort of thing. So, I think it produces wonderful dry wines of wonderful density, even at sort of 13.5, just touching 14 alcohol. And it's definitely something, I sort of started dabbling around with about 3 years ago. And something I really love to work with. I definitely don't have the level of experience that, say Trizan and Niels do with the varietal, but going back to what Dave's saying, it's definitely one of the grape varietals that I do buy a lot for my cellar. I think there's some incredible examples coming out of South Africa. And I think on the right sites, with a sensitive winemaker, it can definitely produce world-beating wines. But I've still got a lot to learn on that front.
And your natural curiosity will take you into that space of learning sooner rather than later, I'm sure. And as we look to wrap up, do you share the enthusiasm of the other three about where Syrah is, where Syrah's going in South Africa?
Absolutely. I adore it as a grape. I mean, I think it's just one of the nicest grape varieties and one of the most exciting ones. So I'm 100% in bed with them all when it comes to where it's going. And again, the versatility, as Trizan was talking about it, making different styles and lighter styles, and wonderful grape.
That is extraordinarily versatile. I took delivery of some almost 16-year-old Gravel Hill out of Hartenberg, set that against some of the other Syrahs. Very, very different wines, both delightful in very different ways, and a reflection of exactly what has been said. Before I go back to David to wrap up, one key question I have to ask Trizan just before we come to the end of what's been a lovely show with all four of you. Have you, Trizan, managed to find a decent surfing spot in Johannesburg for while you're up here?
Dan, there's so many breaks out in Joburg. I actually can't choose, but I'm going to choose the couch surfing. I think that's going to be my best option.
Well, I get Dave to sweep you up to Hartbeespoort Dam. They might have a gentle half a foot or so coming in. David, you've got, from based on what everybody said today, such an exciting lineup, not just of speakers, but also of content, and talking to a quartet of grapes that all have such an important part in our South African wine narrative at the moment. If people still want to come, are there spaces available? How do they get to come and join you?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, that's going to be epic day. It's going to be 12 hours of fine wine power. So there are still tickets available. You can buy them at exanimo.coza. So that's EX. Well, there you go. It's on the screen there for you. So there's a big thing for clicking tickets. It's an all-inclusive event. So it includes 3 meals, breakfast, a nice sort of light lunch, and then at the end we're going to have a nice sort of festive dinner with all the winemakers. And they're going to bring out some wines and going to party on into the night. So and there's going to be a gin and tonic break as well, because you can't just have wine only. You have to, a bit of diversification. So Donovan Rail produces a gin, so we're going to have some giant gin and tonic in between sessions 2 and 3, just to break the day up as well.
Oh dear, part of me wishes I'd never put this particular show together, because all I want to do now is be part of it. Sadly, I won't, but I know that those people who are going to have an absolutely fantastic time. Scramble for those last few tickets at exanimo.co.za. You are guaranteed not just David and our 3 winemaking guests on, but a range of others talking through the double trouble that is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, running through the Chenin Blanc story, and encouraging you never to say no to Syrah, although I'm not sure many people would in the first place. Guys, to all of you, thank you so much for being part of it. Have a wonderful, wonderful day on the 9th. I shall be drinking your wine in absentia and raising a glass to all of you for that Indaba. Hopefully I'm at the next one, but have a great time, and thank you all so much for being part of the show this evening.
Thanks, Dan.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks.
Yes.
So there we go. Anne Ferreira, Trizan Barnard, John Seccombe, plus David Clarke of Ex Animo, ahead of the Ex Animo Indaba. That is the 9th of April. And that wraps this up for the show this evening with one last caveat, and that is our competition, which I will say goodbye to you with. It is your chance to win for yourself from the guys at Bellingham. It's a chance to go to Le Coin Francais, Darren Badenhorst's restaurant, where you can win yourself dinner for 4 people, a 5-course meal paired with vintage Bellingham wine. It is this month's prize. You simply enter, jump on social media, tag us, and tell us why you think you should win this fabulous Bellingham prize, and we'll draw a winner at the end of the month. Here are your competition details, and from there, thanks very much for joining us. Have a lovely evening, and join us back on Thursday when we have a look at the Wine Magazine 10-year report with some of the guys who came out on top. Have a great Monday from a rainy Johannesburg. Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay. Goodbye. To join the Pick n Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.